Mr. Pond Boss, tell me how. Hey, Mr. Pond Boss, let's do it now. Hey, Mr. Pond Boss, you're the one that makes fishing so much fun. Well, I woke up this morning and I headed for my pond. Meet Mr. Pond Boss, yeah, we're gone.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to this Wednesday, August 1st live broadcast from Pond Boss World Headquarters near Lake Texoma, Texas. John Micklick, hello. Dick Tubbard, hello. I see Fred Bingaman checking in already. I'm glad you guys are here. We're going to talk about a pretty interesting topic today, fish kills. We've been getting a few phone calls, emails, text, Facebook messages from people around the nation who are suffering fish kills, and I thought it would be appropriate to talk about that today. So if you've got questions about fish kills, if you've got questions about water quality, anything that's associated with fish kill, throw it at me and let's talk about it. So tonight we're going to do this. I'm going to get it up here. I can now see it on my laptop and see everybody. Lance Faber, John Taskett, Dennis Backshees, Mike Rivers. Let's see, who else is on here? Troy Todd. Glad to see you guys. You know, I'm going to have quite a few things to talk about with this fish kill thing because it's pretty interesting. Hey, Robbie Shell, from our good friend from Purina Mills, Land of Lakes, in charge of fish food over there. Glad to see you're on board. The thing about fish kills that I want to talk about is how it starts. The fish kill is usually a consequence, not a cause. There's something that happened to cause the fish kill. So we're going to talk about that. Hi, Christy. Dick Tabbert got his smallmouth bass today. Craig Baxter likes the video. Hey, listen, while we're talking about that, if you would, right now, share this video to your timeline. That's how we build the audience. We've got, looks like 19 people that I know about that's looking at us right now, and I'd like to get those numbers up. Jim Liner is coming in from Montgomery, Alabama. Hey, Jim. So share the video. That's probably the most important thing, if you don't mind, is share the video. That would help us a lot. And click like and hashtag Pond Boss Magazine in the comments section. If you'll do those three things, you'll be eligible for a drawing for, drumroll, a Pond Boss hat. There we go. Pretty cool hat. And a Pond Boss mug. Don't ask me how it knows to keep hot things hot and cold things cold, but it knows how to do that. Mark Dauber from checking in from Montgomery, Alabama. Hi, Mark. Fish kills, that's pretty interesting. We got a phone call earlier this week from a guy in North Carolina who I'm pretty sure he's got his fish named. That's how much he likes this. Tom Davis checking in from Ohio. Hi, Tom. But what's going on with his pond is he's losing just a few fish every day, and it's a combination of bass and bluegills. My gut reaction is probably it's because of the heat. That would be my guess. But when we start talking about fish kills, there are things that precipitate that, and that's the main thing I want to start talking about with fish kills. Hey, there's Matt Rail checking in from Rushville, Indiana. Hi, Matt. Matt was my guest a couple, 3 weeks ago where we talked about aeration. You can go back. Now, all these videos, even if you can't catch them live, they're archived on the Pond Boss website and this Facebook page, the Pond Boss Facebook page. So we archive each video on the on YouTube, then we link it from the Pond Boss website to YouTube. So you can either find them on YouTube or the pondboss.com website. Now, so everybody knows the resources that you have available from Pond Boss. Of course, the thing I'm going to push a little bit is the magazine. Comes out every other month, chock full of really good information. A lot of pictures for all you guys that can't read. And the magazine, that's what fuels the economy. It's $35 a year, very, very affordable. Also, we have a resource guide, the Pond Boss Resource Guide, and that's available for free if you want one. There's an electronic version on the website. Actually, I just showed you designing a feeding program. We got this little brochure about how to feed fish, but we do have a resource guide that comes out once a year with outstanding vendors. Some of them are advertisers. Well, they're all advertisers if they're in that magazine, in that resource guide. So, talking about fish kills, throw your questions at me. Hi, Clint Wilson. 99 times out of 100, a fish kill is caused because the water quality deteriorates at some level. Now, different species of fish have different tolerances for the toxins that develop in water. Now, a lot of the fish kills are caused by an oxygen depletion, but that oxygen depletion is a consequence of biological factors. So to kind of get rolling on that, as nutrients build up in the water, I'll tell you, I remember an article that my good friend, who's no longer with us, Harold Arms, he wrote an article many, many years ago, probably 20 years ago, and the headline of that was called Killing Your Fish with Kindness. And what precipitated him writing that article was he had a customer who had a catfish pond, and he went down and fed those catfish every day. I mean, he had them named, he had them, you know, there were some he could tell. There was a big male in there that Harold told me about that had a big scar across his face. He called him Scarface. You know, and so some of the same fish came up to eat every day. And this guy loved his fish. He went out there one day right at daylight, and they were all up gasping for air. And just a short time later, they were belly up doing the backstroke. And it wasn't good. You know, so what had happened is he had fed those fish so well and so faithfully, but he never harvested any fish. So he began to exceed the carrying capacity of that pond, because catfish are notorious for that. They'll continue growing in the space, but when they're producing more waste than the water can compost or process, at some point there's going to be enough toxic material building from the bottom of the pond up. It encroaches into the areas where fish have to breathe their own waste, and then they die. So harvesting is something that's real important. See here, we're already starting to get a few questions here, so I don't want to miss those. Frank James says, are warm water fish less susceptible to anoxia than cool water fish? No. Well, you know what? Anoxia means without oxygen. They're all susceptible to that. Cool water fish need a higher concentration of oxygen than warm water fish. That's why they live in cooler water, because cool water holds more oxygen than warmer water. So warm water fish are susceptible at their own levels, like cool water or cold water fish. Grant Rogers says, can you use a water pump to circulate the water around? Yes, you can, and we'll talk about that. That's one of the tools. Now, but you got to know how to do it and when to do it. You know, you can, and I'm going to give you a real world example here in a minute from a call that I got over the weekend, or a Facebook message over the weekend. Hey, Jerry Ollert, if anybody needs any videography anywhere around the nation, check in with Jerry Ollert. He is an outstanding videographer. He does a lot of our videos for us. Sydney Goodwin checking in from Greenwood, Arkansas. Hey, Sydney, good to see you. Here's the thing about water quality. There's several things where water can degrade. The one where Harold Arms wrote about killing your fish with kindness, that was because the guy was feeding the fish were eating the fish food, growing, giving off waste from the fish food. Some of that was solid waste, some of that wasn't solid waste. So he was having to deal with, hey, Danny Tolliver, hello. So what happened was the fish were giving off so much waste that the water couldn't process, so they were basically swimming in their own septic tank. There's Leo Wynn. Hello, Leo. Good to see you, buddy. And what happened was some toxic levels, mostly of ammonia and other forms of nitrogen, were building from the bottom of the pond toward the top. When it encroached beyond the thermocline and got into the upper layers, they were basically breathing gases and breathing waste that was toxic to them. And they couldn't do that. Now, what most fish kills are caused by is an oxygen depletion. Now, that oxygen depletion can be caused from a variety of sources, and I want to talk to you about those so you can be on point to be looking for that. The very first thing that can cause an oxygen depletion is way too much vegetation. If you've got too much moss, too much aquatic plant growth in your water, and let me answer this question because I know it's coming. How much vegetation is too much? Hey, Dave Weber, good to see you from northeastern Kansas. Hey, you know what? Now that you mentioned, northeast Kansas, we're going to have a meeting in southeast Kansas, probably about 2.5 hours from your place. Check out the Pond Boss Ask the Boss forum, and you'll find out more about that. We're going to be having a meeting. There's my son Cameron Luz checking in from Alabama. Colin Pearson, about to get on the plane, but he can't watch. Hey, you'll see it later, dude. That's great. Good to see you, Colin. Pete Gauger was our winner, by the way, of last week, of the hat and the mug. Now, I'm going to try to stay on topic. If I don't greet you now, I'll try to greet you in a little bit. The thing about water quality and oxygen depletions, if you have too much aquatic plant growth, those plants photosynthesize during the daytime. What that means is in the water they're taking up carbon dioxide, which can be left over from the night before, can be a byproduct of fish breathing. You know, when they're gills, when the fish takes in oxygen, it gives off carbon dioxide. So the plants, whether they're rooted plants, floating plants, algae, whatever they are, when they take up that carbon dioxide, they keep the carbon, turn it into energy to feed themselves, and they give off dissolved oxygen back to the water. And so that's where oxygen comes from, for the most part, to keep water going on. Let's see, Matt Rail says he had a fish kill today. Surface temperature was 68 degrees. Unbelievable on August 1. Yeah, well, you know what? You may need to tell us about that. I'll tell you what, give me a few minutes. I think I may invite you on in a minute, so stay with me there, Matt, and we may talk about that. I want to get through a few things, and I think I will invite Matt. So Matt, just kind of hang in there with me for a few minutes, and we'll invite you in. So the plants, what can happen there is if we get a few cloudy, to kind of stay with that whole scenario, photosynthesis occurs during sunlight. When we don't have sunlight, those plants do the opposite. They take up oxygen, give off carbon dioxide. That's called respiration. So that's a natural biological phenomenon that occurs anywhere there's plants, whether they're trees in your yard or plants in your pond. So you can pretty well bet on that. That's gonna happen. So the thing is that if you've got more than probably 60% coverage of aquatic plants, that's when the odds of a fish kill from oxygen depletion from those plants starts to get pretty high and pretty risky. So if you've got a pond that's got 60% coverage of plant life, then your odds of a fish kill and oxygen depletion goes higher. Now, the other part of oxygen depletions are, let's say you got a pretty good plankton bloom. You've got visibility at 18 inches in July. That's kind of scary to me. If you get a real dense plankton bloom, and that plankton bloom dies all at one time for whatever reason, it could be a weather event, it could be a rainfall, it could be a hailstorm, it could be just a rapid drop in temperature, which is probably what happened with Matt. So we'll talk to Matt about that in a minute. Then you're going to see those plants that are used to produce oxygen die and begin to decompose. They're going to consume oxygen as they compost, as they decompose. And when that happens, then the oxygen levels in the pond can drop to lethal limits. And what happens there, let's talk about lethal limits. Every species of fish, and actually different sizes of these species of fish, have a little different oxygen requirement. Gizzard shad, for example, if you get down to about 3 parts per million, they die. Largemouth bass can handle 3 parts per million. So different species of fish have different lower lethal oxygen requirements. Now, also, when a fish kill occurs, it doesn't mean that it's 100% fish kill. I got a Facebook message this weekend from a guy in Central Texas that has a stock pond on his ranch where he raises longhorn cattle. And he was commiserating the fact that he had fish dying. He had fish coming up to the surface, that typical look when they can't breathe. They either can't breathe because they don't have enough air, or they can't breathe because their gills are on fire from the toxic waste products that are in the water that's basically, I don't want to use the word poisoning, but that's probably a legitimate word, that's causing them to not be able to breathe. Their gills are on fire. And so he asked me, I said, hey man, that's part of what we do. So I messaged him back and he said, well, I don't have an aeration system. He says, I really didn't even know these fish were here because it's a pond that we used for water for our cattle. You know, so what he ended up doing is he went down to his local farm store, box store, and bought a 5 horsepower gas-powered trash pump with an intake hose and a hose where he could blow water back out. He started sucking water out of his pond, blowing it back in an arch to aerate the pond. And that pretty well stopped the momentum of the fish kill by adding some oxygen. Now what it didn't do is solve the problem. The problem is whatever caused the fish kill, which in his case was probably a heavy load of plankton that had crashed, had died. So until that cycles out, he's still going to have fish coming up. So now, let's see. Mike Rivers says, are hybrid striped bass more susceptible to fish kills than other fish? I lost mine over a few hot days a few years ago. Actually, yes, they are. They are more susceptible to a fish kill than other species, like even largemouth bass. Now, something else that's important, the bigger the fish, the more susceptible they are to a fish kill. You know, smaller fish are less susceptible because they don't have the same surface area of the gills. They don't have the same metabolic rate. Little fish are more likely to survive an oxygen depletion than bigger fish are, which is pretty sad because the best of your best fish, the biggest of your best fish, are going to be the ones that disappear. Hey, Craig McBride, Jaden Roberts, Leonard Weaver. Let's see here. I tell you what, let me go ahead and see if I can scroll back down here and find where Matt was on and invite Matt in today. And here we go. Okay, Matt, I'm going to invite you. Let's see here. Oops, not letting me do it. Let me figure this out here. Okay, Matt, you know, come back on and say hi, and let me try it again. And we'll invite you on, and we'll talk about fish kills, because I know you've been dealing with several of them. And 68 degrees, that's typically water that's a lot cooler than what we normally see when we have fish kills. So, hey, Matt, just click back on and just say hi, and let me see if I can invite you in. Let's see here if it'll let me do it. Let's see here. I got to go the other way. Uh-oh. Let me go the other way here. You guys bear with me. Thank you. Okay, I'm waiting for Matt to come back on and say hello to me. And then we'll get him on with us. Now, if you're going to try to prevent... There he is right there. Let's try it here. Well, pooey. Oh, you know what? I bet it's because you're not on a phone. I bet you're from a computer. Let me see if I can do it from my computer. Oops. Nope, not letting me do it. I bet it's because you're not on your phone. Anyway, if you can, I know he can hear me. If you can, yep, okay, it's not letting me invite you because I think you're checking in from your phone, probably. Not from your phone, but from your computer. Yeah, no, it's not letting me do it. It's not letting me invite you for some reason. If you can check, Matt, if you're on your phone, just come on as Matthew Rail, and let's try it that way. In the meantime, I'm going to keep talking about fish kills. If you want to try to prevent a fish kill, this is a topic that my biologists with Bob Lusk Outdoors talks to clients about all the time. You know, we get quite a bit of pushback from people who don't really want to buy an aeration system. Well, yeah, they may be pricey. They may be anywhere from $1,500 to $7,000 or $8,000. But if they can prevent a fish kill that would occur in 15 minutes in your pond, is that worth it? Especially 3 or 4 years down the road when your pond is maturing, that really could be a good thing. Now, that doesn't mean that an aeration system will prevent a fish kill. Now, I'm going to give you a couple examples of that. Hey Scott Lindsay, how you doing? I've got one guy that I've been talking to that decided he wanted to buy an aeration system but kind of cheap out on it. And I don't like using that word, but it was the truth. This guy wanted to cheap out on it. So he bought one that was undersized, plugged it in, went through the startup process, and it was so undersized that it did not break up the thermocline of that lake, which was about a 10-acre lake. But what it did do was it shoved enough of the nutrients under the thermocline to the surface that it created a real heavy planktonic algae bloom. So in other words, he took a lot of stuff that had built up on the bottom. Let's see. Okay, let me try that. Let me try you there, Matt. For some reason, it's not letting me invite you in. Usually I can click on the comment and it will let you. Nope, it's not letting me invite you for whatever reason. I don't know what it is. So we'll just keep going. And anyway, he had a really heavy planktonic algae bloom, and then that bloom crashed and killed every fish in his pond. Well, it took a little bit of time. Hey, there's Eli Bridges. Hey, Eli. Let's see, maybe I can do this from on my laptop, Matt. Maybe it'll let me invite you. Nope, it's not. Huh. Man, I don't know what. I don't know why it's not letting me invite you on, buddy. Huh. Anyway, it ain't working. Anyway, this guy had a heavy-duty planktonic algae bloom, and then it all died. It all decomposed. And even though he had an aeration system running, his fish all died. And it killed every fish in that pond. This happened about 2 weeks ago. And after I started doing a little due diligence and trying to figure it out, what had happened was he had bought an aeration system, plugged it in on Memorial Day weekend, cycled it for a couple of weeks to get it up to speed. It created a gigantic plankton bloom because it took a bunch of nutrients that were sequestered beneath the thermocline in the areas where the diffusers were, and it shoved those nutrients up into the water column. And when it did that, those nutrients, Mother Nature's not going to let those go to waste. And this happened in Texas, by the way. So as the water temperature went up, his planktonic algae bloom just began to exceed the capacity of the pond to nurture it. They had a little weather event where they had a couple of cloudy days. During the hot part of the summer, that plankton bloom crashed. And as that plankton decomposed, it consumed so much oxygen that it took all the oxygen out of the water, which caused a fish kill. And so I think it's a wise idea to have an aeration system, but it's a smarter idea to size it for your pond. And you know, with Matt, when Matt was on a couple of weeks ago, he went through that. So if you want to know more about aeration, go back and review that video and contact Matt Rail with American Pond and Lake Management Company in Indiana. He is the nation's leading aeration expert. He can help you with that. So in this case, an undersized aeration system did nothing to help him, but what it did do is create a problem. Now, conversely, if you've got an aeration system that's too big, you're going to move too much water too fast. And when that happens, you raise your ambient temperature through the course of the day. Now, remember, nature likes to have a thermal refuge, so to speak, for fish. That's why fish adjust to the thermocline. Fish like to live up here above the thermocline. Then when it gets hot, they like to move into the thermocline, even though there's just barely enough oxygen to keep them alive. They'd rather have that temperature than the oxygen. You know, so when you aerate too much, you create water that's hot from the bottom to the top. So you need to have a pretty smart protocol and the right size aeration system to move your water. Hey, there's Todd Watts checking in from Hurricane, West Virginia. Good to see you, man. Doug Biggs, is it possible to test the water, say once a month or so, to catch a problem before it gets so bad that a fish kill happens? You know, that's a good question, Doug. I'm going to tell you no. Now, because here's what happens with the fish kill. Let's just say, let's just take this Pond Boss mug right here. We're going to fill it up with water. And as we pour water, it's going to go until it reaches the top. Then what it's going to do, it's going to overflow. Well, when you start having water problems, chances of you being able to identify them just through a simple water test are low. You know, what you can do is you can start, I tell you the number one thing to do, measure your visibility. If your visibility, as summer comes on, if your visibility is less than 24 inches and the water has a green tint, talk to a pro, because you are ripe. Like this lake where the guy put the aeration system in and it created a plankton bloom, his visibility was 7 inches. And then when the plankton crashed, visibility went from 7 inches to 4 feet. And then guess what? That aeration system was still plugging along. It spit those nutrients, regurgitated those nutrients right back up into the water. And when he called me and sent me pictures, I swore I was looking at a pond full of split pea soup. It was as green as it could be. It was planktonic algae. And if the fish didn't die the first go around, they sure were going to die on the next one. So that undersized aeration system was his biggest problem. So now, to test the water, I tell you what you can do if you want to test the water. Don't do it just once a month. Buy an oxygen meter or buy a Hawk kit where you can titrate and check oxygen. If you're real serious about this, if your pond is valuable to you and you want to minimize the odds of an oxygen depletion, then you need to check it probably 3 times a week, and check it in the evening before the sun goes down, check it at daylight. And keep track of those. Write it down, because here's what will happen. You will see, you'll have a curve that'll look like this. It'll move up and it'll move down. This will be late in the afternoon. This will be early in the morning. This is low. This is the low version. This is the high version. And when you see that curve begin to drop because you've got 2 or 3 cloudy days, I've seen ponds that showed 14 parts per million oxygen at 4 o'clock in the afternoon with a heavy plankton bloom. You can bet the higher the oxygen level is in the afternoon, the lower it's going to be at daylight. Because when, that plankton or that algae is going to be sucking the oxygen out of the water at night. So now here's where it gets a little bit complicated, and I'll see how simple I can make it. Water at about 80 degrees with 85% saturation of oxygen, which is normal, is about 6.8 to 7 parts per million. Now, I may be off a little bit on that. Don't hang your hat on that, but that's close. So what happens, the reason it could be 14 parts per million is that the plankton or planktonic algae or the plants are producing oxygen faster than it can leave the water. So it's going to be super saturated in the afternoon in cases of heavy plankton blooms. What that means is there's so much plant life producing so much oxygen that it's super saturated. What that means at night, there's so many plants consuming so much oxygen, it could go from 14 parts per million down to 3. And with a swing like that, that is stressful. It also changes the pH of the water. That is stressful. Where a good aeration system, moving that water continually, can mitigate that and bring those two curves closer together. Hey, Kevin Briggs, good to see you. Ronald Schaaf, hello. What was the name of the aeration specialist you mentioned at the beginning? Matt Rail, American Pond and Lake Management Company, Rushville, Indiana. He's on right now, so you can tag up with him and talk to him because he really knows what's going on with aeration. He knows how to do that. I mean, he spent a significant amount of his career doing that. So, going back to Doug Biggs' question, if you could check anything, check oxygen. If you could do it twice a week, 3 times a week, morning and night, and log the data down, then you can begin to predict when you can have a problem. If you start seeing oxygen levels in the afternoon above saturation, which there's charts about that. But let's say right now, if your water temperature is in the low 80s and you got oxygen levels at 4 in the afternoon above 8 or 9 parts per million, chances are that oxygen is going to plummet and go down to maybe 4 parts per million by the next morning. And if that's the case, then you can predict an oxygen depletion. Now, what's going to trigger that oxygen depletion? There's a couple of things that can trigger it. A weather event. You get a pop-up shower that drops the water temperature 6 degrees, 8 degrees, and kills that plankton bloom. You can bet there's going to be an oxygen depletion. Now, will it be severe enough to kill your fish? Who knows? You'll find out. But in that case, when you see that high spike in oxygen in the afternoon and you see a low spike early in the morning, that is a signal that right now is a good time to be aerating. Whether you buy a bottom diffused aeration system, a circulator, a deep draft fountain, or even like this guy did in Central Texas where he went and bought a trash pump, sucking water off the bottom, blowing it across the pond. Now, the downside to having that pump is you got to fill the gas tank up. I called the guy that did that and talked to him for a few minutes. Well, actually, no, I didn't call him. We texted back and forth. And he was telling me that he was getting up about every 3 hours in the middle of the night to go fill the gas tank up on that pump. And what some guys will do, if you have electricity, you can go to Home Depot and buy a sump pump and it'll do the same thing. You can use it with electricity. So throw some more questions at me and I'll tell you some more stories about fish kills. I'll tell you another way to have a fish kill. There's John Wilson checking in. Let's see, here comes a question from Scott Lindsay. Is a creek-fed pond with nice constant flow more or less susceptible to a fish kill or no difference? It's less susceptible. It's less susceptible if it's the constant flow coming from a spring, for example. I'm going to presume if there's constant flow, there's water either percolating through the ground or coming from a spring. And either way, the more water that can flush, if it's clean water coming in, now if you're telling me you're draining water off of 1,000 acres of corn and the water's coming after it percolates through the corn and hits a gravel bed and comes to your pond, that's not the case. Be looking at your visibility. That's the number one thing to do. Study your visibility. The less visibility you have this time of year, the more susceptible you are to an oxygen depletion that can cause a fish kill. So I had a guy, oh gosh, I don't know, a long time ago, 15 years ago probably, call me and wanted me to come look at treating some plants. Now here's a catch-22 for you. Earlier in this broadcast I said if a pond has got about 60% coverage or more of aquatic plants or visibility less than 18 inches this time of year, your risk of an oxygen depletion and a fish kill goes up. So this guy had about 60% coverage of his pond in aquatic plants. And it was concerning to him, so he called us, and I went out there and looked at his place, and I said, hey, you're at a high risk for an oxygen depletion. He said, well, what do I do? I said, well, man, it's July, and if we were to take out any of those plants, even if we took out a fourth of those plants, you still run the risk of an oxygen depletion, because even though the chemical's not going to kill, the herbicide's not going to kill the fish, killing the plants and letting them decompose to consume oxygen, that's what can kill the fish. So he thanked me very much, called somebody else. Somebody else came out there and he treated the whole pond, killed all of his fish. So he decided it was more important to take all the plants out and not listen to that advice about taking the plants out a small amount at a time or waiting until the fall. And what happened was he killed all of his plants, and the guy that did the application was a plumber who bought an over-the-counter herbicide that wasn't labeled for use, and now the guy's that killed all of his fish. And he called me wanting to complain about it. Well, sorry, you got to listen to this stuff. So if you have a high amount of vegetation in hot water, you are going to run a risk of a fish kill no matter what you do. The big thing we do with all of our clients, and John Wilson's listening, he's probably nodding his head with what I'm fixing to say. We say fixing to in Texas. You're not going to kill but a small percentage of those plants at a time, and spread that out over a period of 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 weeks to take them out. And then you're monitoring the plankton bloom. Because those nutrients, when you kill plants and those plants die and they decompose, then they're going to spit those nutrients back up into the system most likely, and that's going to turn into a plankton bloom. So you're essentially fertilizing your water when you kill the plants. So you got to be smart about that, and don't do it this time of year. Get the plants way back. Get them in April or May when they first start growing if they're problematic. Mark Lombardi says, is there a water temperature that you should turn on or turn off your aerators to keep thermal layers in a small pond? That's a two-phase question, so I'm going to tell you this. If you've got your bottom diffusers on the bottom, and even if you run that aeration system only for 8 hours a day, you're still going to break up your thermal refuge, the thermal layers in a small pond. What I've started, and we really need to get Matt to chime in with this. Matt, if you can type an answer and put it up here and let people know, how to get in touch with you as well. And John Wilson, you know what? Put a plug in for yourself too. While you're here, while you're on board, put your website and Facebook pages and all that. Put that up here so people can find you, John Wilson. Same with Matt Rail. I want people to be able to talk to you guys. So on a thermal refuge with bottom diffused aeration, don't put it in the deepest part of the pond. If your pond is 10 feet deep, set that aeration system at 7 feet deep. Put your diffuser at 7 feet. That way you're aerating the top 7 feet, which is efficient. That's good. And what I tell people where in the hot parts of the country is we have people aerate from about 9 o'clock at night till about 8 or 9 in the morning. That way they're not moving water to let it touch that surface layer where the atmosphere hits it and it's so dadgum hot. Okay, there we go. There's John Wilson. You can find him at Aqueduct Lake. They're in several states. John is based in Ohio near Cleveland, big Indians fan. But he's also got branch offices all over Ohio and one in Georgia as well. And then Matt Rail, he'll consult with you no matter where you are around the nation on aeration systems. So, look at there. There's Elizabeth checking in. Elizabeth Rail, that's Matt's bride. Good to see you there, lady. Frank James, do fish survive low oxygen levels at certain times and places in a body of water by moving to other areas with more oxygen? The answer to that question is yes, they do. Yes, they do. They will move around seeking oxygen, but they're going to seek temperature first. So I have seen ponds where there was a complete oxygen depletion in part of the pond, But another part of the pond, there wasn't a complete oxygen depletion. The fish in the other side survived. The fish over there didn't. You know, and what's interesting to me is fish don't have sense to where they can go find better oxygen levels. You know, they just don't have that ability. They don't have the ability to think and to reason to say, you know what, I can't breathe very good over here and I need to run over there. They don't know where over there is. So if they're there, they're going to do better. If they're not, the chances of them finding that zone is not very good. Now, what they will do, if there's a gradual change in oxygen, they will seek that like they're following a path if that's happening in a pond. I can't tell you that happens in a pond because I honestly don't know. I've never studied that. So throw me some more questions. Let me see. I need to hit some more fish kill situations. One of the things, let's see, I took a few notes. Basically, the water, follow the water. If you've got a heavy plankton bloom, lots of vegetation, your odds of a fish kill go up. If you got blue-green algae, odds of that go up. Mark Gabney says, I'm doing the dishes while I'm watching. I would never admit that, dude. But you know what? Since you did, you keep your man card. Did I just hear you say it would be better to aerate overnight? Yes, it would be better to aerate overnight. You run from 5 o'clock until noon in Athens, Georgia. Switch that, Mark. Switch that from 5 to noon. Switch that to like, say, 10 o'clock at night to 6 in the morning or 7 in the morning. That's when your pond is going to have the lowest amount of oxygen anyway, and you run the risk of decreasing your temperature if you operate the aeration system in warmer weather. You know, from 5 to noon, you're going to get a little bit warmer temperatures than if you run it from like 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock at night until daylight or so. So do that. Water chemistry. Water chemistry, I'll tell you a fish kill I saw one time. This was pretty amazing. I had gone out into West Texas to stock a brand new pond for a guy near the little town of Post. That's where Post Toasties were invented, which is kind of cool. This little pond was a brand new pond. The guy filled it with a well, was beside his house, and he wanted some fish in it. So he put some fish in it. This was in the month of May. And I can't remember the year, probably 1991 or 92 through there, a long time ago. And we saw these storms building up just a little bit west of us. So we got the fish in the water. Then he wanted me to come look at a couple of ponds out in the country on a farm, a wheat farm they just got out there. So we drove out there and looked up, man, the sky back to the south to west was black and green. Well, that's here in Texas or wherever, if you see green skies, that's not good. So we headed to a barn, got there just as that storm hit, and I mean, there were golf ball size hailstones. We couldn't talk to each other in the barn because of the noise it was making on the tin roof. That storm didn't last very long. It blew on through, but I mean, there were hailstones everywhere. So we drove down to look at the pond that we had come across, and hailstones were flowing in with the rainwater. That pond had a complete cover of hailstones on it. Now, they didn't last very long. They melted, but we stood there and watched it for about 30 minutes. And by about 20 minutes, when most of the hail had melted, it had dropped that temperature of the water probably 25 degrees and changed the water chemistry of the water because they'd been in a drought. We saw fish coming up, gasping for air. They were in deep shock. Now, it wasn't so much that they lost a lot of oxygen as it was that they had been shocked by the chemistry change and the temperature change. And I needed to get back home, so I didn't stick around, but he called me the next morning, and he had a massive fish kill in that pond. But the pond where we put the fish, where the well water had been put in, it was a little cooler, didn't lose any fish there. Leo Wynn says, with the example of the catfish pond, would it be wise to perform a periodic waste removal using a siphoning method or introduce beneficial bacteria to process the waste? Great question, Leo. We can always count on Leo to ask good questions. What it would do, if you wanted to siphon off some water off the bottom of a catfish pond, that would help eliminate the waste. Now, what that does is it puts off the problem. The same thing with beneficial bacteria. Now, what the beneficial bacteria would do would be to expedite the processing of the fish waste. That would speed it up. The problem is all this is going on where it's anoxic. It's going on below the thermocline in these catfish ponds. So aeration would help. put it off, it wouldn't stop it. You know, and taking let's see, periodic waste material use. Yeah, by siphoning water off the bottom, you're taking out some of the most nutrient-laden water. And if you can take out a foot of water off the bottom, where you drop the pond a foot, then you can fill the pond back up with a well. That would help you solve the problem. Matter of fact, that's what catfish farmers do to mitigate their waste buildup in catfish ponds. But here's the best answer. Harvest some fish. When those catfish start hitting about skillet size, you know, pound and a half, 2 and a quarter, start taking some out. If you'll do that, then you're going to minimize the risk of all the other fish dying. Look at catfish as a put and take fish anyway. Same thing with hybrid striped bass. They're not going to reproduce. And channel cat will reproduce, but they got to have special circumstances, and we discourage that. So once those catfish that are fed, what that guy with the catfish pond should have done, and many like them, instead of naming all those fish and getting to be your friends, take some out and eat them. That's just the bottom line. Fred Bingaman, let's see. Hey, Fred, he says, Josh Jennings, you see that carved bass with the red hat? Hand carved by Wendy at Bear Tracks and donated by Dave and Joni Sefton. That's exactly right. There it is. Here it is right here. See that fish? That's one of my favorite things we've got up here at Pond Boss World Headquarters is that fish carving. Yep, and Wendy did that from right there in Brownstown, Illinois, or nearby. There's Jessica Frost. Hi, Jessica. Good to see you. So throw me some more questions, and we'll keep rolling with this fish kill thing. I tell you, it's really common when somebody has a fish kill for them to call me, and they'll say, hey, somebody's poisoned my fish. And my first question is, how do you know that? And most of the time, well, we don't. We just think that's what happened. A crop duster was nearby, or somebody came by and poisoned my fish. Well, most of the time, that's not the case. It's not the case. Now, Dave Weber says, did I just hear you say discourage channel cat reproduction in ponds? Yes, I did. Let me expound on that. It's kind of hard. Jessica says, hi, Papa. Tell those kids I love them. Hey, Scott Hohensee with Purina Mills. Good to see you, Land O'Lake, with the wildlife side. Check out Purina's wildlife Facebook page. Good stuff right there. Dave Weber says, did I hear you just say that discourage channel catfish reproduction? Yes. The reason is channel catfish have a high propensity to outgrow their space. So if you feed them, they're going to grow, and they get to the point that they'll continue to grow and outgrow the pond. Basically, you get more pounds in there than what the pond can handle. Largemouth bass typically don't do that. They're not likely to do that. You know, where channel cat will do that. So now channel catfish are cavity spawners. So if they have a place to spawn, they will spawn. They'll like on catfish farms, the old time fish farmers use cream cans. They'll take cream cans, put them in there, face them to the south, channel cat go in, then they'll go collect the eggs and go hatch the eggs in the hatchery. If you do that in your pond, and let's say you have a 3-pound female channel cat, and she lays eggs, and they all hatch, and the daddy sits on them and does a good job doing what he does in that cavity, whether it's a hollow log, a tractor tire, a cave up under the bank of the pond, or a cream can, what's going to happen is those fish are going to start to grow and start to thrive. And if you get a 3-pound female channel catfish that lays somewhere between 20 and 40,000 eggs, how many of those need to survive before you have a problem? So even if you've got a 10% survival rate of 50,000 eggs, you only get 5,000 channel catfish, you are grossly overstocked. So I discourage having channel catfish reproduce in a small pond. It's way better to go spend $35 and buy 100 when you need 100 3 or 4 years down the road. So I think that's the better way to handle channel catfish. Hybrid stripers can't reproduce because they're sterile hybrids. Leo says, with ponds in their farmland areas with limited amount of spring and well water, which is more beneficial when you want to raise moderate amounts of fishes? Create a filtering pond, create a filtering system, bite the bullet and look for water. I'd say create a filtering pond. The reason to create a filtering pond in that case is not only does it help you diminish the opportunity for more nutrients to flow into your good pond, you're also harnessing water that you can use later if you need it. So you've got a really good buffer there because you've got water. So when your fish water starts to degrade, you can add water from that filter pond up above. Now, bite the bullet and look for water. I've talked to a guy today that's developing a piece of land south of Dallas, Texas, and he needs some dirt, some filled dirt to make house pads. So he's going to excavate about a 4-acre site to build a pond, to end up with a pond. So his question to me was, what kind of habitat was what I need? And the watershed's only about 10 acres. And I said, well, with a 10-acre watershed for a 4-acre pond, that watershed's not adequate. He said, well, I'm going to drill 3 wells. You know what? Why are you going to drill 3 wells? Because they'll only make 15 gallons of water each. Okay, so he was going to drill those wells. And when we had a discussion, he was pretty sharp guy. Some of the stuff I told him he already knew. But one thing he said was, I told him that 1 acre, 1 inch deep is 27,000 gallons. And this time of year, you can expect half an inch of water to evaporate off of a pond in this part of the planet. You know, so you start doing the math on how much water do you need. So to answer your question, if you're going to bite the bullet and look for water, most people look for water by going down and drilling a well. You know, if that's the case, you need to see what kind of well you can get and how much water will it produce and what kind of water is it. Is it good water? And if it is, rock and roll. Mike Hill, can you run a well 24/7 in place of aeration? I see those as 2 different things, Mike. I see the well as providing water to supplement water or to exchange water in the pond so you can flush some bad water out, fertile water out. Where an aeration system, its job is to move water so it can contact the atmosphere to get rid of its gases and to absorb gases. That's what an aeration system does. And I don't think it would be practical to run a well in place of aeration because the electric bill is going to be dramatically higher depending on how deep you're pumping from. Let's see, Ron Kinney, a 2-acre pond, rainwater replenished only, seems to cycle from green blooms to brown and red when it dies. This is about every 6 weeks on a rotation. That makes absolutely perfect sense to me. Maximum depth is 7 feet. Lots of frog life in all stages, and fish seem to be surviving the bloom die-off. Low visibility all the time. Is aeration the answer? With 7-foot depths, I'd like for you to talk to one of our biologists or get in touch with Matt Rail on here and talk to him. I don't know where you are. Low visibility, aeration. Aeration could be an answer. Now, I don't know that bottom diffused aeration is the smartest thing to do in water that's maximum 7 feet deep. But it could be that a circulator where that's moving water a little bit more horizontally might be a better answer. Okay, North Carolina. Yeah, check in with Johnny Foster Lake Management. But since Matt Rail's on here, check in with Matt, let him counsel you on that. But here's what I'm going to tell you about 2 acres of water, maximum depth 7 feet. I don't think that a bottom diffused aeration system would be the best idea, but Matt, if it is, Matt will tell you that. Now, what aeration would do, whether you use a circulator or a deep drafting fountain, you know, or bottom diffused aeration, whichever system you choose, anytime you can move the water, it helps stabilize the water. The more stable the water is, the more autonomous it is, the cleaner it can be. Now, that doesn't mean it'll prevent a fish kill, but what it does mean is it'll stop those bloom spikes from going up and down. It'll make it more like this instead of those big spikes like what you're experiencing now. So aeration could be a good idea, yes. Actually, it probably is a good idea. Just got to choose the right system. Frank James, I have a 10th-acre forage pond next to my main lake. Could I grow channel catfish in it for eating even though I don't want them in the main pond? Yeah, you sure can. About how many could I safely grow if I fed them? Maximum depth around 8 feet. I'm going to say, Frank, if you'll stock 200 to 300 of them and start harvesting them at a pound and a quarter to a pound and a half, that's a good number. You can actually, in that pond, I don't think you'll ever have more than 250 pounds at a time, but through the course of 2 years, you could probably grow 500 to 700 pounds of catfish, selectively harvesting them as they get to be big. So I'm going to say, yes, you can. Clint Wilson says, if you have a dense plankton bloom going into July and August, would you try to treat it chemically or monitor and hope you don't have a plankton die-off causing a fish kill? I'll tell you this, Clint. One of the protocols we've used is to thin a plankton bloom with algicide. So you can do that, and it's a lot less of a risk than just riding the wave and hope that it doesn't happen. Now, if you're going to do that, get somebody that knows what they're doing, that can come in there and do it well. Because if you take out, say, 10 or 15% of that plankton bloom and you kill it with an algicide, those cells are going to sink to the bottom. They're going to start to decompose below your thermocline and have a less of a chance of affecting what's going on above the thermocline. So it could be a smart move to treat it chemically, but you need to have a strategy with that. Now, if this were September, I'd tell you something different. This is 1st of August. You're at the highest risk of the year of a fish kill from warm temperatures. And now another thing to think about, see, I don't know where you are, Clint. If for you guys that are in the north and if you've got heavy plankton blooms now, you need to be managing those plankton blooms to get the water in shape so when you go into the winter, you're not going to have a winter kill issue. So there's some strategy behind all this stuff, and I like you to lean on pros that know what they're doing. Guys like Matt Rail and John Wilson and Johnny Foster and Midwest Lake Management, Bob Lusk Outdoors, all of our lake management services down in Houston. Solitude Lake Management. Solitude's got offices all over the place. I mean, those guys are good friends of ours, and if you've got a professional pond management company near you somewhere, talk to them about it, because it's one of those kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of a deals. So throw me some more questions. Let's see, what else have I got here? I know one thing I was going to talk about. On a rare occasion this time of year, we'll see fish die from diseases. Now, most of the diseases we see from fish occur typically in the fall or in the early spring. Now, if you've got, let's do this. How do you determine why your fish are dying? First of all, assume it's water, but don't assume that's the only problem. Because if your water quality is deteriorating and your fish are suffocating, and you're seeing, here's a trigger. All species, all sizes of fish in an oxygen depletion are coming up gasping for air. They're coming up all over the surface trying to breathe. If you see all species of fish, all sizes of fish trying to breathe, that's an oxygen depletion that you can pretty well bet has occurred because the water quality has deteriorated. Okay? Then the thing about diseases are usually specific to a certain species and sometimes a certain sizes of species. For example, if you've got a catfish, bluegill, bass pond, and you see your catfish coming around the edges, just lethargic, laying on the edges, odds are pretty high that they've got a parasite or a bacterial infection or something like that. Now, if you catch a fish that's got a red sore on it or a bruise, that is a stressor, usually due to something going on in the environment that's caused that fish to get sick. And if that's the case, send me an email and I'll tell you what to do about that. Sometimes, especially with fish on feed, you can eliminate or minimize the risk of a fish kill just by medicating the feed to treat the aftermath of whatever the stressor was. Mike Rivers says, what is a plankton bloom? Plankton are the microscopic plants and animals that feed, and most of them are single cell plants and animals, amoebas, paramecium, you remember studying all that in high school, that are living in the water column and feeding off nutrients that are dissolved in the water column. There's zooplankton, which are animal plankton, and there's phytoplankton. Phytoplankton are green, zooplankton are brown. And a healthy pond has got a color that goes somewhere between a kind of an olive green color to a brown color. A while ago, the description was talking about where the blooms are coming up and down. The reason that the water is green is because it leans a little more heavy toward the plant plankton. But as the water turns brown, that's zooplankton. The reason the water gets clear in those cases is those animal plankton, the zooplankton, feed so heavily on the green plankton, the algae, that they consume it, then they run out of food, they die, and they sink to the bottom, then it all starts over. So then the water goes green again, which is a heavy phytoplankton bloom, which is mostly algae, and then the zooplankton numbers start to go up. It's kind of like if you went to Luby's cafeteria with the you were there, and then your college football team shows up, and they start to eat. Pretty soon, the food's going to be gone. They better go find another place to eat. Well, in a pond, the zooplankton, when they overeat their food chain, they die. And it's their growth and reproduction is exponential. So what was going on in that case was he saw a shift from phytoplankton up, then zooplankton, and the phytoplankton went like that as the zooplankton went up. So when the phytoplankton was eaten, then the zooplankton crashed, then the whole cycle started over again. So a plankton bloom, we measure plankton blooms typically by the visibility depth, how far the sun can penetrate into the water. We use what's called a Secchi disc. I should have brought one, I didn't, forgive me. It's a round disc with a cross painted in it. Opposing squares are black, opposing spots are white. So we drop it down and we see how far down the water we can see in the water. When it disappears, then we raise it up to where we can see it again. That's the visibility depth. And we're looking for visibility depths this time of year, 18 inches or better. If it's less than 18 inches and the water's got a green, olive, brown tint to it, then you've got a heavy plankton bloom. If your water's muddy and looks like chocolate milk, totally different deal. So Leo says, has anyone attempted a non-chemical approach to removing an algae bloom using skimmers? The idea of a pool lake skimmer using passive vortex system to remove small trash. You know what? I have had some people that do that, and you've got to monitor that thing every day, because if you were to take, say, a 1 acre pond and that's got a heavy plankton bloom, and you extract all that algae and all that plankton out of it, maybe a ton. Now, not dry weight, but wet weight. You may have 2,000 pounds of that stuff in there. So with the fine amount of filtration that you'd have to get it out, you've got to have a big filter, or you've got to be in there doing something with that filter. Now, I have seen people use a skimmer to where they're using, I'll tell you one thing that Matt's done in the past. He has developed a system where he can use aluminum sulfate with water being moved into a more closed environment and use alum to cause that algae to coagulate, flocculate, get heavy, and sink. But you really got to have a sophisticated system. Most people don't do that. Most people don't do that. All right, let's see. Dick Tabber says, me too, Leo. I'm tired of raking. Okay, we're talking about two different things here. When you're raking algae, that means it's filamentous algae. What I'm talking about are single cells. When everybody that has a pond at some time of the year, you're going to see what looks like green paint, a skim of green paint laying across the surface where the wind is blowing it over. That's dead plankton, or that's dead planktonic algae, or dead blue-green algae, which is a bacteria, not an algae. But when you see that stuff floating on the surface, that's stuff you can't rake it. You touch it, it falls apart. It's like trying to pick up paint, because that's what it looks like. Okay, so Leo, I think if I have seen small ponds like water gardens, things like that, where they do have skimmers that can use passive vortex systems like a circulator to move that stuff around and move it into somewhere where it can be skimmed off. It's just the volume of it in ponds, especially ponds that are a problem. If a pond's got a normal plankton bloom, we don't care to skim it off because it's actually helping the food chain. If we've got, and one thing we try to do when we're managing lakes is I like to use fish that will actually eat that stuff. Filter feeders. We've actually started using paddlefish a little bit more because they're plankton eaters. Threadfin shad are plankton eaters. And to a lesser extent, some species of tilapia, we can use Mozambique here. They're more grazers. They'll eat filamentous algae, But I can't help but think that now they're not going to have an impact on planktonic algae or any other kind of algae that's in a plankton bloom. They're not going to impact that. But if we can use some fish that will, that's part of how we try to manage dense plankton blooms if we can. The question earlier is, can you use chemicals? Yes. I would much rather try to nip it in the bud before it gets bad. And the way you do that is, like I said earlier, you monitor your visibility. So when I picked this topic, I wasn't quite sure if we could talk about it for an hour, but by golly, I guess I can talk about an hour about anything. So I appreciate you guys looking. Pond Boss Magazine. Tell your friends about it. Please share this video to your timeline so others can enjoy it as well. Because I know there's somebody going to have a fish kill in a week that maybe if they saw this could help them. Let them know about that. Pond Boss Magazine, $35 a year. I'm not going to make the hard sell because you guys have heard that. And I appreciate you guys checking in with us. Looks like it's 7:30. And I look forward to seeing you guys again next week. Same time, 6:30, 7:30 here on the Pond Boss Facebook page. Don't forget, pondboss.com. Lots of good resources there. BobLuskOutdoors.com. Check in with John Wilson. Check in with Matt Rail. They'll help you guys. See you guys next week.